Hola, buenos dias. My name's Laura, and in this video, I'm going to be teaching you how to master the Spanish present tense, which is the first tense that we're going to be covering in this series. So the best place for us to start is right at the beginning with personal pronouns or pronombres personales in español. In English, you'll recognize the personal pronouns as I, you, he and she, we and they. En español decimos yo, tú, él, ella, nosotros, ellos, y ellas. In Spanish, we also have a couple of additions that we don't have in English. Those additions are vosotros, usted, and ustedes. As we've already discussed, tú means you in Spanish. In Spanish, we also have vosotros. Our vosotros is similar to our tú in that you are speaking directly to somebody. The difference is vosotros, you are speaking to a group of people. So it'd be similar to the English for you guys. Do you guys want to go and get some dinner tonight? Usted and ustedes, on the other hand, we use to address people formally. So if I was speaking to somebody that I didn't know particularly well, is older than I am, or a teacher, for example, I would say, ¿Cómo está usted? How are you? Formal setting. If I was speaking to a collective, a group of people directly, who I also would like to show respect to, I would say ustedes. ¿Cómo están ustedes? So now that we've already spoken about how you can refer to somebody that is doing the verb, let's get into the conjugation. So what actually is verb conjugation? Verb conjugation refers to the verb changing to match appropriately for the person that is doing that verb. An example in English would be, I could say, I walk. If I were talking about a friend, however, I would say, she walks. So walk has changed to match who is doing the verb. In Spanish, we do the exact same thing, and we do that by changing the end of the verb to match the person doing the verb. So how do we know which endings to use? Well, that depends on how we categorize our verbs. One way that we categorize our verbs in Spanish is by their ending. So the ending before they have been conjugated, whilst they're still in their infinitive, their base form. All Spanish verbs can either end in AR, ER, or IR. Those are the only three endings that you'll see. This is quite important because depending on which ending is at the end of the infinitive verb, that's how you're going to conjugate it. Those are the patterns that you're going to follow. So, let's start with an AR verb. The example that I'm going to use is hablar, to speak. The best way that we can see the endings is by drawing out a table. On the left-hand side, you're going to want all the pronouns that we've just spoken about. And on the right-hand side, you're going to see the different endings that could possibly be put with those pronouns. So the first thing you're going to want to do is knock off the last two letters, so that AR, ER, or IR that we just spoke about. Take that away and add a particular ending. So for example, if I wanted to say that I speak in Spanish, I would say yo hablo. There's an O at the end there, yo hablo. If I'm wanting to say that you speak, I would say tú hablas. Yo hablo, tú hablas, él, ella, usted habla. Nosotros hablamos, vosotros habláis, ellos hablan. So, let's go through some examples. Primero, yo hablo inglés. Yo hablo inglés. I speak English. ¿Tú hablas español? ¿Tú hablas español? Do you speak Spanish? ¿Vosotros habláis por Skype? Do you guys speak over Skype? So as you saw, all of the endings changed. Now let's take an ER verb as our example this time. Beber, to drink. Just like with our AR endings, you can see that the ER example, the endings have changed on the end of the verb as well. So I drink, yo bebo. You drink, tú bebes. So instead of the AS, we've now got an ES. Primer ejemplo, él bebe leche. Él bebe leche. He drinks milk. Segundo ejemplo, nosotros bebemos chocolate caliente. Nosotros bebemos chocolate caliente. We drink hot chocolate. Finally, we have our IR endings, like vivir, to live. And I would do the same again. Yo vivo. Yo vivo. I live. Tú vives. Tú vives. Él, ella, usted vive. Nosotros vivimos. Vosotros vivís. Ellos viven. Now this time, instead of me giving you an example, I want you to pause the video and see if you can come up with an example yourself. Okay, time for a small recap. Question 1. What are the 3 endings that a Spanish infinitive verb can end in? How can I say in Spanish, she drinks water? She drinks water. In the present tense, all 3 of the verb categories, 𝐓𝐢𝐤𝐿, 𝐸𝐷, and IR, have one pronoun that ends in the same letter for the present tense. Which one is it? Okay, so the verbs that I've just shown to you are called regular verbs. Any verb that is regular follows the exact same pattern as I've shown you here. So if these are regular verbs, how are irregular verbs formed? So in the present tense, we can categorize this again into 3 different ways. We can categorize this into verbs that are irregular in the yo form, so when you're talking about yourself. Verbs that have an irregular stem change, so I'll show you a bit more on that in a second too. And finally, verbs that are irregular in all their forms, so they don't follow the pattern at all. Here are a few examples of verbs that fall into the first camp. Caer goes to caigo, to fall. Conocer, conozco. Dar, doy. Hacer, hago. Poner, pongo. Salir, salgo. Traducir, traduzco. Each of these verbs, after its form in the first person, are regular thereafter. It's just when you're talking about yourself. Moving on to the second category, we've got irregular stem changing forms. So these are verbs that the stem actually changes rather than the ending. Jugar is a great example of this. So the verb to play doesn't go yo jugo. We actually have to split that middle bit into yo juego. Yo juego. Tú juegas. Él, ella, juega. You might have also heard these referred to as boot verbs. This is because if you were to take a line and draw it around those where the stem is actually irregular, it would form a boot, kind of. Nosotros and vosotros, the stem doesn't actually change. So it's not juegamos, it's jugamos, exactly as you would for a normal verb. Finally, we've got some verbs that you just need to commit to memory because unfortunately they don't follow any of the nice patterns that we've just spoken about. In the present tense, estar and ser are 2 really good examples of this. So ser does not go to so, it becomes soy. Yo soy. Tú eres. Él, ella es. Nosotros somos. Vosotros sois. Ellos son. Later on in this course, I will teach you the difference on why we have 2 different forms of to be and when you should use each of the different cases. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope that's been helpful. Next week, we'll be covering the preterite tense and the imperfect tense. So if you'd like to know a little bit more about that, follow and subscribe for more.